Alrighty, people are starting to trickle in. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rafaela de la Vega, and I am an APP Development Manager at WSET Americas, and I'm sending lots of warmth from Chicago. And before I go ahead and introduce our speaker, I'd just like to get a couple of housekeeping rules and talk a little bit more about WSET for a quick sec. So WSET is constantly excited to host these types of webinars with special guests. We pride ourselves on 50 years of delivering wine education to enthusiasts and professionals. And in those 50 years, it has expanded over to spirits, sake, and now beer. This delivery of education could not be possible without, of course, the 800 course providers that we have in over 70 different countries. So if you have yet to embark on your WSET journey, please go ahead and visit our website, wsetglobal.com, for your nearest course provider. All right, so some housekeeping rules. Please give us some love on the comments. Let us know where you're coming from or where you're joining in from. If you have any experiences to share, we're happy to just look at our comments and share those on the spot. If you do have any questions, please add those in the Q&A box that'll be at the very bottom of your screen. And we will do our best to get those answered as we go throughout the presentation. And of course, this will be recorded. So if you do have to hop out or you miss this, please visit our WSET Events Hub page to check out the recording. All right, so now Dr. Laura Catena, hello.
Hello.
She is our honorary president and managing director of Catena Zapata, which just won World's Best Vineyard in 2023. Congratulations. And that comes as no surprise to us. She is a medical doctor and fourth generation vintner on a mission to elevate the Argentinian wine scene. Laura founded the Catena Institute of Wine in 1995 to conduct industry-leading wine research, much of which she will share with us today. She has authored 3 books, including my favorite, Malbec Mon Amour, and she has received many accolades, including Outstanding Achievement Award in 2023, the Old Vine Hero in 2023, which we will be speaking about some old vines, and of course, the Woman of the Year 2022. So thank you so much for being with us, Laura. I'll let you take us along on this awesome journey through Argentina.
Well, thank you very much, Rafaela. I am so happy to get this honorary WSET title because I'm all about educating and talking about wine and the super interesting conversations about, climate change, wine and health, wine from all over the world. So this is such an honor. Anyhow, just 2 things I want to comment. First of all, I heard Rafaela say Argentinian, and people often get really stressed out with me, like, Laura, is it Argentine? Is it Argentinian? It's both of them. You can say Argentinian, you can say Argentine. Most Argentines or Argentinians don't care which one you use. So you're good, Rafaela. I personally use more Argentinian like you did, but Argentine is fine too. And then the second thing I want to tell everybody is this is the time to go to Argentina. So in case you don't know this, we just got our Michelin stars. 7 restaurants got Michelin stars, and there's 50 ranked restaurants. One of the 50 is in our winery in Mendoza. And then one of the Michelin star restaurant is actually owned by our winemaker, Alejandro Gil, and his wife, Casa Vigil in Mendoza. And I think there's 4 in Buenos Aires and 3 in Mendoza. There's one with 2 stars in Buenos Aires, Aramburu, and the rest have 1 star. And then many of them have the sustainability, the green star. So you guys, this is the time to go to Argentina. Also, the exchange rate is so favorable for the euro or the dollar. So this is the time to go and go to all these restaurants. And I mean, it's so amazing. I mean, that we just got all these stars. So that's very important. But now to telling you a little bit about why Argentina is such a special place to make wine. So, okay, let me just see if this is working. Okay, so this is me hugging an old vine. And this is a little bit of what I'm going to talk about, because I really feel like in some ways for Malbec, Argentina is the old world. And if there's any Europeans in the crowd, you're going to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I don't even love this old world, new world concept, but I'm going to explain to you throughout this talk why I say that Argentina is the old world for Malbec. Okay, so this is a little bit about, let me actually make myself smaller. Okay, so this is just a big, screenshot. I'm not one of those people that is obsessed with, WSET students or any kind of wine students memorizing regions. I think there's so many regions in the world, but if you can remember, Argentina is the southern part of South America, so in the southern part, you've got Argentina, then you've got the Andes all the way on the west. You see the little mountains here on this drawing. And then on the other side is Chile. You're already more advanced than most people. Here's Argentina, southern part of South America. And then, Mendoza is right in the middle. And if you go all the way east to the Atlantic, you get Buenos Aires. So Buenos Aires is, the Paris of South America, this incredible city. Half of the people, we have about 40 million people in Argentina, a little more. Half of the people live in Buenos Aires. So really, if you come to Argentina, go to Buenos Aires because it's just a lot of the culture, the food. And actually there's some controversy around this. I think 3 out of 7 restaurants are in Mendoza. And there were all these questions about, wait, why Mendoza and not some of the other provinces? And that's because, Mendoza is this hub for wine. 70% of the wine in Argentina is made in Mendoza. We have all these regions that I show here on the map. And it's really just this incredibly dynamic place with all these different kinds of wines made, different varieties, different terroirs, different soils, different altitudes, different winemaking methods. People with, like our family, 120 years in our family making wine. And this energy is transferred into the food concepts as well. So, again, this is a super exciting time to come to Argentina. So what do you need to remember about Mendoza? And I know that you guys want to pass the test as well as be able to teach this. So I tell people that, probably don't bother memorizing the 100, there's almost 100 appellations, or we call them indicaciones geográficas, so geographical indications in Argentina, and a little over 25 in Mendoza itself. I don't even know all the 25 in Mendoza. So what I tell people is, hey, remember Mendoza, 70 to 75% of the wine is being made there. And then you see here in the map, and I have to put my glasses to see it, but you go up and down on the western coast, not the coast, but on the western foothills of the Andes. And you go from Salta to the north, Catamarca, La Rioja, San Juan, Mendoza, Neuquén, Rio Negro. Neuquén and Rio Negro would be considered Patagonia. Patagonia is shared by Chile and Argentina. So it's the name of the overall southern part of the southern hemisphere. But what I tell people is, listen, don't obsess too much over the different names. Just, probably remember Mendoza is the biggest producer, which has lots of small producers. 50% of the producers in Argentina own less than 5 hectares. That's about 10 acres. So there's lots of small little producers either making wine, selling their grapes. And then most of the winemaking is done in this area, in the foothills of the Andes. So remember that. And then inside Mendoza, what I tell people is, again, don't obsess over the 25 different appellations. I think if you can remember Luján de Cuyo, you see it here on the map, it's a little northern, closer to the city. It's around, 900 meters, 2,700 feet elevation. So it's not the highest altitude region, but it's got a lot of old vine vineyards. Our winery is located there. You see the little map with the pyramid. And then south of that, in the kind of different shades of brown, you have the Uco Valley, which includes Tupungato in the northern part of the Uco Valley, Tunuyán, and San Carlos. And for example, Altamira is inside San Carlos. You might have heard of Gualtallarí, this where the most fancy vineyards, or like the most famed vineyards. We have a vineyard called Adriana in Gualtallarí that has more 100 points than any other vineyard in South America. Gualtallarí is inside of Tupungato. You see the tiny little Gualtallarí there. So I feel like if you can remember Luján de Cuyo, you can remember the Uco Valley, and inside the Uco Valley, Tupungato, Tunuyán, San Carlos, you already know a ton. And even if you just remember Argentina and Mendoza, I feel like you already know a lot. So again, this is actually, I think, a very helpful map to remember these things. Okay. So this is the core of kind of what matters in terms of difference of flavor in Argentina. And I love to show this chart, and I'll explain it to you in a minute, because it really sort of explains in a nutshell why we have such incredible diversity of wines in Mendoza and Argentina, because there's, Mendoza is not the only high altitude place. As you go north, you have in Salta many different altitudes, but this is mostly focusing on Mendoza, which is, where I've been making wine my whole life. So I don't know how many of you know about Winkler. Winkler was this professor at UC Davis who came up with this degree adding system where he would add the temperatures over 10 degrees Celsius for the 6 months before harvest. He would add them all up and he'd say, okay, if the number is really high, that means it's really hot, then we are a zone 4. So here, where you see some degrees Celsius, it's the third, line. That's the adding all those degrees, right? So if the number is low, that means it's pretty cold, and that's region 1. As it gets hotter and the summation of the degrees gets higher, then you get warmer. So you go from cold temperate, warm temperate to warm. Okay, so let's now go all the way to the right where it says international areas. So if you do this math of the degree days, you get, Burgundy and Champagne would be on the cooler side. Some parts of Burgundy would actually be zone 2. Then you get zone 2 would be, a little warmer, Bordeaux, Barolo, La Rioja, Spain. Again, some parts of La Rioja would be zone 3, Côte d'Iron in France. Then zone 3, you get, Napa Valley, Chianti Classico, Barossa. And then zone 4 would be a place like Châteauneuf-du-Pape, a little bit warmer. And then you also have, zone 5, which would be some parts of Portugal. So and this is really important. Like sometimes in Argentina, people are like, oh, my vineyard's higher than your vineyard. It's not a question of higher or lower. It's just in each altitude, you have a different temperature and the wines will taste differently. And so now let's go to the local areas. When I say local areas, these are parts of Mendoza, and you see the name of the place, and you see where it says 1,500 meters underneath Gualtajari Highlands. That's the altitude. So if you're trying to go from Châteauneuf-du-Pape to Champagne in France, that's going to be about a 7-hour drive, right? If you're going from Gualtajari Highlands, the region 1 in Mendoza, to Lulunta, the warmest part, around 900 meters elevation, that's about an hour drive. So why I like this slide is because it really explains how you have this, incredible diversity of temperature at very close distances. And what that allows you to do is to have very different wines made in one winery, because the winery could be kind of in the middle of all these and be quite close to all these different regions. So one winery might have like this really cool climate wine, and then might have another wine that's a little riper and a little warmer climate. That can all happen in Argentina. That cannot happen in other parts of the world where you're either cool climate or warmer climate. So that's interesting. And also we can make these blends of the same variety. And we do that for Malbec, for example. We have a wine that I think it's on the WSET test. I know it's on the Master of Wine test, Catena Malbec. That's an altitude blend. So it comes from vineyards that are only about 40 minutes apart from each other, same Massal selection of Malbec, but at very, very different soil climate combinations. So you get this, what I call the Chanel number 5 wine, because it's like great components from very different climates. So you get minerality, you get ripeness, you get, good acidity, florals, you get ripe aromas. So you get this beautiful wine that comes from, totally different locations that are very close to each other. So there's no risk to the grapes, from having to travel a long time to the winery. So anyhow, this is a really important slide to understand Mendoza wine. And, we could do a similar slide, for example, for Salta to the north and for all the regions of Argentina. Okay. And this is the explanation of what I was telling you before, the Catena Classic. This has, some parcels from Gualtajari, almost 1,500 meters down to Lulunta, 900 meters. You put all that together and you get look at the chart on the left, more mineral, floral, spicy, and you get the more jammy from the slightly lower altitude. Again, these are very close to each other. And you put this in the bottle, and it's this beautiful wine that's a blend of different altitudes. And this, what I call the high altitude blend, is something that really I don't know of another part of the world where you can do this. and it gives us a lot of versatility and diversity of flavor. Now, climate change. So this is the big topic that everybody's talking about. And what's really interesting is that although we have a big problem with water because we have less glacial water in the Andes by where we make wine in Mendoza, and that's a very big problem with climate change, and we're developing all kinds of ways of saving water. In terms of temperature, and I'm going to explain this chart in a minute, and this is a chart based on data that we've been collecting over the last 30 years. In some places, we have even longer than 30 years. We've been making wine since 1902, but we only got these temperature stations in the 90s. But here, what you see is that we're not seeing warmer temperatures everywhere. So the first one is La Dunta. That is actually around 800 meters elevation. It's a little east of Mendoza City. The temperature has gone up and the rainfall has gone up. Then Agrilo, that's where our winery is. It's in Luján de Cuyo, same. But you go to Altamira, which is remember we were looking at the Uco Valley, the southern part was called San Carlos. Altamira is inside San Carlos. And we see that the average temperature has actually gone down. It's gotten cooler. And then you see here, and also more rain. Then you go to El Cepillo, which is also in the southern part of Uco Valley. We see cooler temperatures, less rain. And then you go to Gualtallarí, this place I was telling you about in Tupungato, part of the Uco Valley, and we see less temperature, more rain. So what does this mean? What it means is that some mountain regions are actually seeing cooler temperatures. And I've talked about this to Greg Jones, who is this really famous climatologist. I don't know how many of you have heard him speak. He's amazing. I actually heard him speak at the IPNC, the International Pinot Noir Symposium. That's where he's from Oregon. And he says that there is a climate phenomenon where some mountain regions see cooling. And this is really interesting because altitude could really be, an answer to climate change, planting more vineyards at altitude. And this is something that's very particular to my region. And going back to what Rafaela says, I really believe that we need to be doing research. I think that every winery, no matter the size, needs to be doing some research because there's some things like, let's say you're working on cars, on electric cars, right? There's some technology that whether you're making a car in Japan or in Germany or in the US, the technology is the same. You're all using, copper and lithium, for your batteries that you're getting in some other country. Here, whatever you're doing is determined by this particular location where you're making wine. So you can't extrapolate what happens in France to what happens in Argentina. You just saw that chart. It's so different. So I really think that all winemakers, and most winemakers are experimenters. I've never met a winemaker that doesn't have some kind of research going on. But it's important that we do research that is, well controlled with some science behind, because otherwise, if you're not doing the research correctly, you might reach the wrong conclusions. I also think that people need to collaborate on research, and I'll show you some slides about how we collaborate with people not only around Argentina, but also in other parts of the world. Okay, and this is, I don't expect you to understand this slide because it would take an hour to explain this research, but this is some research we did to understand sunlight intensity, because we were noticing that some of these wines at really high altitudes, over 1,000 meter elevation, which is around 3,000 feet, we were seeing like much more tannins and thicker skins in the grapes. We could even taste it, like you put the grape in your mouth and you feel this tannin. We said, this is more than what we'd expect from just the climate being cooler. And we did this really cool experiment where we had this kind of transparent cover on, one, row of vines, same soil, and the one next to it didn't have it. And this plastic cover was only covering the UVB light. And what we found was that when you didn't have the cover, you had more tannins. And the theory is that the grape is protecting the seed, because the grape doesn't know that it's going to reproduce by cuttings, not by seeds. The grape thinks it's going to reproduce by seeds. So the vine is protecting the seed from the sunlight and creating more tannins. And this is really interesting because this means that not only do we get this really cool effect of, the weather not getting warmer, but we also get more tannins, and tannins are flavor. And so this is something really special for wine. So the sunlight intensity is something that we discovered through all this research that was really unknown before we did this research. This is a little bit about the geology of Mendoza. So there was a day where we didn't have the Andes, and 150 million years ago, and where you get this clashing of 20 million years ago of the continental and the oceanic plate, and you get the Andes rising. And if you look to the right side of the illustration, you'll see that says stones and calcium carbonate, sands, clay, and loam. So what happens when you have this clashing is you get these mountains, right? Then you get all these ice ages. And then you get these glaciers melting when it's not an ice age anymore. And when these glaciers melt, you have all this, material being, kind of pushed down by all this water and ice melting. And you see these alluvial fans that look like these little pancakes, between the mountain peaks. Those are alluvial fans. And what happens is that the really big rocks stay up on the top, because if you're thinking, you're a glacier, you're melting, right? Well, if your current, unless it's going super fast, it's not going to push a big rock, right? But the little smaller debris, like the sands, and then the clay is the lightest, will end up in the bottom, and the sands in the middle, and the rocks, depending on the weight and what kind of current there was, are going to end up in different places. So generally, the higher the altitude and the closer you are to the mountains, you're going to get more bigger rocks and materials. And then as you go down, you're going to get more clays. Now, this is not 100% rule. So for example, there's a place called Agrelo where there was a lagoon. There's a lot of clay there because there was a lagoon there for, hundreds of thousands of years. So geology obviously is also particular, but in general, the soils have these characteristics. And this is really important because, remember we were looking at the Winkler chart, not only do you have different temperatures, but you also have different soils. And that explains why, if you have a Malbec or a Cabernet or a Pinot Noir or a Bonarda from different locations, is not just the temperature that is going to be affecting flavor, the sunlight, which we just discussed, but also the soils. And this is just a little bit of kind of a summary of what I just said. And this is actually a Perito Moreno in Patagonia, but I love this photo. And I put this photo here just to remind everybody that, yes, climate change is real. And these glaciers are getting smaller and smaller, not only the ones in the Andes, but also the ones in the south of Argentina. We all know that we're losing ice in Antarctica. Argentina, it owns part of Antarctica. And this is a disaster. And, I just told you how, it's so cool that we don't have warming at high altitude, but we have a lot of problems with less water. This is an emergency. I'm an emergency doctor. This is an emergency. And so let's do everything we can in our own little worlds to do something about this. That's another talk about what we can do. I think I'm scheduled to give that talk at another moment. Okay, so here it is, again, the heavier rocks closer to the Andes and the farthest from the Andes, you see more clays. And then see at the bottom, rocky subsoil. So all across, the mountain regions, from the north to Mendoza to the south, you have this rocky subsoil. And this is really important because it provides really good drainage for water. And that's why organic farming is so easy in our region, because even if it rains, and you saw that in some of these regions it's raining more, the water is in and it's out because of this rocky subsoil. So if you're digging down, it's really hard to dig down. Like we sometimes dig for water because there's all these like gigantic, really, big rocks that were formed when these glaciers melted and, when these rocks were deposited. And this is just the classic soil texture classification triangle. I don't know if this is part of you guys' test, but it's something that, it's kind of one of the first things that you learn when you're learning about soil is, you have clays, which are the lighter, smaller particles, 0.0002 millimeters. That's super tiny. You need a microscope for that, for sure. Then you have silt, which is like a mixture of sand and clay textures, but a little in between, and then sand is a little bigger, and then all the way, if you kept on going on that arrow, you would hit the rocks. I like this chart. Okay, and this is just to show you like a real life example This is actually in the same vineyard. This is the Adriana vineyard, which is almost 1,500 meters elevation. It's an old dried river bed, which explains why we have such different soils. And this is same altitude, high altitude. And remember, I was just telling you, oh, the clays and the sands are further down, but we have quite a bit of sand here and a little bit of clay too. So if you look at the middle parcel, you know, that kind of looks like clay, right? So that's actually a mix of clay and sand, and you don't see a lot of rocks. You see a few rocks on the top, but not a ton of rocks. Then you go to the right, and that's the Parcela we call river, and that's literally right next to the one in the middle. And there you see a ton of rocks, right? So this was probably where there was a river going down that kind of dried up a little bit, so the rocks stayed. And this is a soil where you get a lot of you know, sunlight being reflected and really good drainage. So the yields on the one all the way to the right will be a lot smaller, and there'll be like a lot of tannin and concentration. The one in the middle, this is from Fortuna, which I call it the Pinot Noir of Malbec, because the wines are a little lighter, they're really floral. The yields are higher, which that would be a whole other conversation. You know, people always kind of bragging like, my yields are so low, my yields are so low. You know, you can make great wine from, you know, really low yields and from just a little bit low yields. Super high yields tend to not give great wines, but there's a range of yields where you can get fantastic wines. And so I'm not one of those purists about, you know, unless you're, you know, below 2 tons per acre, it's not a good wine. That's ridiculous. Okay, and then all the way to the left, this is where you see the limestone. Like you see that kind of, you know, sort of cement looking stuff. That is basically calcium carbonate that becomes agglomerated. And again, that's related to this river drying up at different times. And then you see on top, that's actually a pretty shallow subsoil, topsoil. That's the part before the cement, that's about 25 centimeters. So this is, you know, how different the soils can be one next to the other. So, you know, I remember somebody once telling me like, oh, you know, all the soils in Mendoza are the same, you know, and, you know, kind of implying that the only place in the world where you have, you know, soil diversity one next to each other is Burgundy. And, you know, that is obviously ridiculous. You know, this is one vineyard very close to each other, all these different soil textures. So, you know, I fight a lot against, you know, like snobbery about my place is better than your place. You know, I think really, I mean, there's some places where it's very hard to make wine because it rains too much or it's too cold or too hot. But most of the regions that have been traditionally making wine for a long time have like glorious wines, beautiful wines, and it's a question of a taste. And I think there shouldn't be so much wine snobbery. Okay, and this is remember I was telling
real quick.
Yes,
I'm just going to interrupt with a couple of questions that have come
please.
through. The first one has to do with soils, mostly to do with the profile of the wine. So how does the addition of carbonate, as opposed to say silica-rich sands, silts, and clay in the rocks affect the taste and texture of the wine? Yeah.
So I wish I knew the answer to that question. So we have done some research on the different flavors and the different soil textures, and we know the flavors are different, but I can't tell exactly why. There's a lot of theories. So it is true that in the calcium carbonate rich soils, you have, you know, there is a correlation with different pH in the wines, but it's not always lower pH, which, you know, that lower pH means higher acidity. Like we did this one research where we had 2 soils with a lot of calcium carbonate, and one had, you know, the wines had higher pH and the wines had lower pH. So even that, which is kind of, you know, widely thought that, you know, soils rich in calcium carbonate will have lower pH, that doesn't always happen. The theory that I think is more correct is that, and this is a fact, that when you have a lot of calcium carbonate in the soil, you get this kind of like little water retention bubbles because the calcium attracts the water. And so, you know, a clay soil, the soil in the middle will attract a lot of water. The soil all the way to the right will, like, there will be no water. Like the water goes in and the water's gone. And you see all these little tiny little roots. I mean, that poor vine is just like digging and digging and digging because, you know, the water doesn't stay. Now with calcium carbonate, you get tiny amounts of water, but not too much. The soil in the middle, if it's a very rainy year, could have problems. It could have too much water. We could get rot there. I mean, it's unlikely because we don't ever get that much water, but that could be a problem. The soil, the way to the left with the calcium carbonate, you get good drainage, but you get these little micro areas of water. And these soils, we've actually done microbial studies, and these soils have more microbes than, not more microbes than clay soils, which have the most microbes because they have the most organic material, but they have more microbes than, let's say, a purely rocky, sandy soil. So I don't know why, so many sort of great parts of the world for wine have calcium carbonate in it, but I do know that some of the best wines that we make and the most sort of elegant come from locations with calcium carbonate in their soils. So I think there is something to it, but honestly, I have not seen any research about it specifically where, I can tell you calcium carbonate soils gives you, this kind of aromas and this kind of chemistry. That there's no research that shows that, but there is a correlation, but there, we cannot say causality for the calcium carbonate, but a lot of really good parts of Mendoza where we make great, for example, Chardonnay, great Malbec, this is the Parcela Mundus, that's, our most expensive Malbec, the one that I think probably ages the best, comes from a calcium carbonate soil. And, we know that, there's calcium carbonate in some of the, like, Saint Emilion and Burgundy. So yeah, so sorry for my not complete answer, but that's all I know about calcium carbonate. Any other questions, Rafaela?
Yeah, so we've got another question from Tom. You mentioned earlier that glacial water is less plentiful than previously. Are vineyards able to move more towards dry farming or reduced irrigation? Or is this a critical factor restricting vine planting?
I love this question. So when I started making wine and working with my dad, I came from medicine, and I didn't really know that much about wine other than I was a consumer. Like at a very young age, I used to go with my father to France as his, quote unquote translator. That's how he got me to go with him, because he was not happy that I was a doctor. He wanted me to go work with him. Now everybody loves that I'm a doctor because they can ask me all their medical questions. But anyhow, we used to go to France, and the minute we would say that we irrigated, we get these looks like, oh, so your wine is crap, basically. Because in France, where there's a ton of rain, both in the winter, not as much in the summer, but there's like tons of water, there's underground water often at 1 meter. You would only irrigate if you wanted higher yields. That's changing also in France. In some parts of the south of France, irrigation is allowed because otherwise the vine died. So in our region, we have less than 8 inches of rainfall per year. So we have very, very little water. And the native peoples of Argentina, they built these canals from the Andes that make farming of any kind. Like we also make walnuts and apples and pears and peaches, like tomatoes. Like we are a big agricultural region in Mendoza, besides wine. And this was all made possible by these canals built by the native peoples before the Spaniards came. And so without this water, we could not make wine. Now, we do not just randomly water a ton to get high yields because we don't even have that much water. Like we barely have enough water to make wine. So the irrigation is kind of an art. It's a very artisanal thing. It takes 10 years for a new vineyard manager to be trained in the irrigation. So we actually have a 10-year apprenticeship for any new person because they basically have to understand the different parcels within a vineyard so well that they need to know where to put more or less water, look at the weather forecast. And we also have, scientific measurements, shoal under pump, all kinds of things. None of that equals the human eye. We've actually done research on this where we tried to compare, kind of doing some sort of mathematical predictions of when to give water based on, what the water in the plant, that's what the shoal under pump measures. And the person who was trained to water that vineyard was better at predicting how much the vine would need and how to get the best quality. And always low yields. Like we are never, we're basically watering to make the plant struggle a little bit because that gives us better quality, but not too much, not to stress it too much. And we are now actually, because of climate change and having less water, we're actually putting more water in the winter, which would be more of the way things would be in Europe, or, you know, some parts of the US where there's, like Oregon, where there's more water, because then some of that water is stored in the soil and the roots dig deep. And one of the things that we've done a lot of research on is root depth. And in those sites, like, it's very normal to have root systems below 2 meters. And if you were irrigating, like hydroponics, you know, where you were just putting a lot of water, you wouldn't get these kind of deep root systems. So, you know, dry farming is a very sexy term, you know, that like people, you know, that makes sense in some parts of the world where, you know, because it basically stresses the vine. And when the vine's stressed, it will often do good things. If it's stressed too much, it's like people, you know, a little bit of stress, we all perform better. Too much stress, you know, we need, we quit our jobs, kind of a thing. So it's the same thing with the vine. So in terms of to really answer the question, the only place where you could potentially do dry farming is Guadalajara, where there's actually quite a bit of rain. But in most places, there's some years where you're going to need to water. We do all drip irrigation, because it's basically you use 90% of the water than if you flood. And flooding is the traditional old system that, you know, most people are not using anymore. Yeah, I think dry farming as a concept is less relevant in Argentina. But I do think that understanding how to water for quality and how to give the vine some stress, but not too much, is super important. So it's a very good question. And it's something that I think, again, going back to this, you know, that you need to do your own research. You know, every person needs to really get to know their vineyard and spend a lot of time in their vineyard, and, you know, do little trials of, you know, this year I give a little more water, this year, you know, I put water in the winter and not, you know, in the summer, or whatever you want to do, looking at the weather forecast. You know, you need to be so attentive. You know, this vine is literally like a small child that you need to care for. And really, the more, I really think that the more you're there, you're thinking about it, the better your wine's going to be. Any other questions, Rafaela?
I think we should continue on. We've got a couple about terroir, but I know you're going to.
Oh, okay. All right. So, so the Catena Institute, I founded in 1995, because what I realized was that we had all these, you know, that was the era of the flying winemakers. We had all these people coming to Argentina telling us, you know, do this, do that, remove the leaves of the vines. And we were like, no, they're going to burn the grapes because we're at high altitude. And, you know, they'd say, no, do it anyhow. Then we'd burn the grapes. And there was a lot of this, like, people from the outside telling us what to do. Nobody knew what to do with Malbec. And I realized that we had to do our own research. What's been really exciting, you know, it's now been, oh my God, it's almost 30 years, is that we now have collaborations with UC Davis, Université de Bordeaux, University of Burgundy. We're doing this Pinot Noir and Chardonnay study. We're the site for South America. And it's just so exciting because we can partner with other people, with other countries, to solve problems. And, you know, I'm on the board of UC Davis, and it's been so exciting to collaborate with UC Davis. I mean, mostly them helping us, because, for example, vineyard viruses is something that nobody knew anything in Argentina. And the head of FPS, Foundation Plant Services, came to Argentina to talk to people. And I mean, I will be forever grateful, because after that visit, everybody started thinking about viruses and how to prevent vineyard viruses. It's just, I think it's really important when you do research to share it with your region, with other people, because, you know, we're all in this together. And the only way we're going to solve some of these problems is by collaborating. And this is the terroir study that came out of the Institute. This is the team. I mean, these people are so smart, and oh my God, I just love our team at the Catena Institute. Half of them are working on PhDs. And this was the study. The guy all the way to the right, there's a woman, there's a guy to her left, his Roy Urbieta. This is part of his PhD thesis. And this study published in Scientific Reports, which is part of Nature magazine. We did it in this journal because it's open source. This is a very hard journal to get into, you guys. And this is the largest study ever done about terroir. And we did 24 different parcels within Mendoza. And what we found was that for half the parcels, you could bring a bottle to the researcher and they could do the chemical analysis and create a fingerprint for that wine and tell you where exactly it was from. That has never been done before. And it was done over 3 years, and this was reliable over 3 years. And so this kind of research is being done in Australia, it's being done in California for Pinot Noir, but it will always be the first and the largest study ever done about terroir. And we did this big conference where we presented it in France with somebody from Bordeaux, with Greg Jones, the climatologist I was telling you about, with Jane Anson, who is a British journalist living in France. And she actually said something really interesting to me. She said, Laura, because I said, Jane, do you think people are going to believe that Argentina did the largest terroir study ever anywhere? You know, like this is such a French concept. And she said, no, she said it's more believable because it's coming out of Argentina. If the French did it, everybody would say, oh, this is the French again, you know, bragging about terroir. But it's coming from Argentina. That makes it more credible. I thought that was kind of interesting. So if you guys can just Google terroir, Catena, scientific reports, and you can read the whole paper. It's so interesting. And actually, there's another paper coming out soon from the same data, but with more of the aromatics. This was the polyphenol analysis, and that's going to be really fascinating. And this is just, I'm not going to spend too much time here. What I say, this is a heat map, and when I say heat, I'm not talking about temperature. It's the way sensory analysis is done. There's actually a technique that the world's expert is Hildegard Heimann at UC Davis, but it's used all over the world to characterize wines. And this was used as part of the research. And you see Tupungato all the way to the right, Tunuyán, Luján de Cuyo, and they all have different fingerprints. If you look at the bottom, I'm sorry it's a little blurry, but you see all the way to the right says spicy. Then you see, oh my God, I can barely read this. Berries, eucalyptus. We need to improve the definition. So you train a group of people over several months, and then you give them samples and they tell you what they smell. And this is going to get you guys excited who are worried about AI. Basically, they've tried to replace people with, sensory peaks that can be done. You can do the chemistry of a wine and look at all the aromatic peaks on a column, but actually a person is better than any machine at this. So, so far, we don't think a machine can replace a person in telling you what a wine is going to smell like, because the machine cannot determine which peak will be more dominant. Only the human nose is. So you guys, the human nose is still better than a robot. I love that. Okay. So, Rafael, are we still good? I'm now gonna, what time? Oh my God, we have a little time. Okay. So
yeah,
we're good.
I
Okay.
think keep going and then we'll answer the questions at the end.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you're going to say, like, Laura, what the hell is Aubert de Vilaine from Romanée Conti doing on your slide? But this is important. So when I started working with my dad, everybody in the world, all they could talk about was clones. Clones. And for Malbec in Argentina, all we had was Massal selections. 100% of the vineyards planted in Argentina were Massal, which means like very, very diverse vineyards. And I remember feeling like, oh my God, but I don't have clones for Malbec. That's so sad. And so, but I'll tell you a little bit about the work we did with Malbec. But this is where I realized, and I have Aubert de Vilaine to thank, that what we had was amazing. And so in the 90s, I was at the Naples wine auction, and I'm standing there in my little, fancy dress, and I look down and I see Aubert de Vilaine. Of course, I recognize them. And I said, oh my gosh, should I go talk to him? Because I make some Pinot Noir. We planted Dijon clones in Mendoza in the early 90s because there was only sparkling Pinot Noir in Argentina. There weren't like still Pinot Noir cuttings. So I go to Aubert de Vilaine and I say, Mr. de Vilaine, how are you? I want to tell you about my Pinot Noir project in Argentina. He looks at me, he's like, oh, that's interesting, Laura. What do you have planted? And I said, oh, I'm kind of bragging, like I have 777, Pomard, 115. I'm telling you about the joke, but he basically looks at me. He's like, no, that's crap. That's terrible. He's like, we have the Massal selections of Pinot Noir from these old vineyards that we've developed, like the second generation. These clones are terrible. I can't remember what he told me, but it was really negative. So then I looked at him and I was like, oh, but for Malbec, I have, hundreds and hundreds of different individual Massal selections. In fact, I thought this might be a problem. He was like, oh my God, no, that is so precious. Tell me more about it. And we had this long conversation about the Massal selections of Malbec. And it was literally Robert de Villen that made me realize that what we had was vineyard gold. Like we had the most amazing thing you could imagine, because Argentina had been so isolated from the world that we had never been clonified. Nobody had developed any clones. And so we had all this incredible genetic diversity. So here's me and our winemaker Alejandro at the place where they're sort of, reviving or storing the Massal selections of Pinot Noir. Okay, so here's the data. The Massal vineyards in Argentina, it's almost 90% of the vineyards are genetically diverse. Ungrafted vineyards, 92%. And we're talking about 220,000 hectares, of vines. This is like 400 something thousand acres. This is a lot of vineyard land in Massal vineyards. And in the rest of the world, there's no more than 5 to 7%, because most of the vineyards planted are planted with clones, because, after the 70s, the rest of the world just got all planted with clones and grafted. So in Argentina, we still plant a lot of our vineyards by Massal selection, where you just go to your neighbor's vineyard, you take the cuttings of the vines that look healthy, and then you plant your vineyard straight on the ground, or, usually do little pots, but then it goes straight on the ground without a graft. So Argentina is really kind of the old world for this, because in the olden days, all vineyards were Massal and all vineyards were ungrafted. And this is something that very, very few people know. And I've been talking about it because I started talking about this in the 90s, but nobody seemed to care. But today, I think there's sort of a reawakening in the world that this is important. In Europe, a lot of people are obsessing over this. I heard Gaia talking about this, in Barolo. And so I think this is super interesting stuff. And you should all come to Argentina to look at our genetically diverse vines. I talked to the people of the Peru. In Peru, they have a potato place where they keep genetic diversity. And I think we're kind of in a similar position in Argentina with Malbec, but we also have genetically diverse Cabernet Sauvignon, Bonarda, Torrontés, Tempranillo. We have other varieties where we have pre-phylloxera vines in Argentina. So it's super interesting. Syrah. Okay, so this is just a quick explanation of Massal selection. And well, obviously, the one to the right is messy. And, I am not going to stop talking about, World Cup #1 until we lose it, or maybe we won't lose it. But anyhow, one clone would be like your whole vineyard or your whole parcel is messy. And to the left, we have a Massal vineyard, which is, each vine is an individual. And I like to explain this way because I find that unless people are have a science background, they have some difficulty understanding clones versus Massal selections. And what we find is that in an easy year where we don't have too much frost or hail or or temperature things, the clones often do really well because they all ripen at the same time, and you get like wine that's like very elegant, very balanced. But in a difficult year, if you get hit by frost and all your vines are the shoots have already come out and they're or some are flowering, or they're in moments where frost would be real dangerous, you actually do much better with the Massal vineyards that have vines in different stages. So and also a lot of people think that the wines are more interesting because of the diversity of ripening moment and what each little vine is providing in terms of flavor. So I think this is a super interesting topic. This is my dad. A couple decades ago, he's standing next to an old Malbec vine, and just the numbers. Pre-phylloxera in France, there were 40,000 hectares. Today, there's about 6,000 hectares of Malbec in France and almost 50,000 in Argentina. But the interesting thing is that in the 70s, the Argentine plantings were down to 15,000 hectares. So, Malbec was sort of on its way out in Argentina also. And, when my father released his first Catena Malbec, literally no one knew Malbec. I would go and help on my days off from being a doctor, and people would say things like, oh yeah, this wine is delicious, but I'm not going to buy it because I can't sell it. This will be a wine buyer. Today you have to have Malbec on your list, on your restaurant, in your wine store. And it literally was not that way, not that long ago. We're talking about, mid 90s, nobody knew Malbec. And I think, I love to give credit to my dad. If he hadn't had this vision to, resuscitate Malbec for the world, I don't know that we'd be seeing the kind of, preservation of Malbec and, the Malbec revolution in Argentina that we see, and the success of so many producers, if this hadn't happened. This is the Catena cuttings. We have 135 different cuttings, and we plant in all our vineyard. We plant some clones, we plant Massal selection, and we plant the 135 cuttings. And we started doing this in the 90s because, even if people were talking about how clones were so good, I don't know, even before talking to Robert de Villen, I understood that genetic diversity had to be preserved. And so we're in this really privileged position at Catena to have, not just Massal selections, but cuttings that we have studied and we know a lot about them. So this is super interesting. This is just to show you how different these cuttings are. I mean, look at how different these grapes are. These are all Malbec. So you can understand how each vine would provide a different flavor. It's a little bit about climate. I'm going to skip this hail, frost, and zonda. All kinds of bad things happen to vineyards, you guys. It's a very risky business. And I'm going to finish with this. So we have a vineyard where we are preserving selections virus-free. I'm not going to talk a lot about viruses, but virus is just like people. Viruses are a big issue, and you're much better off planting a virus-free vineyard. Sometimes viruses affect vines and nothing happens. Like, we people have viruses on our bodies. Like, we have microbes, we have bacteria, we have, we're filled with microbes. CMV is a virus that most people have, that unless you're immunocompromised, it doesn't hurt you. But in general, there's a lot of viruses that can affect vines, especially grafted vines, because then you have it both in the graft and in the vitis vinifera. So we call it a supersonic vineyard. That was kind of a little joke name, but then it stayed. And this is the people here in the photo. I'm there in the middle, but this is a family that with the little boy that basically, every day he gets back from school and he goes with his dad to the vineyard. And this family basically takes care of this place, and they realize the importance of their work, and they're so committed to preserving the genetic diversity of all these vines and virus-free. And so this place is really remote. It takes like an hour and a half to get there from a place that's already far, because you can't be near other vineyards, because otherwise you won't be virus-free. And it's super expensive to do this, but we think it's important to do this for Argentina. And then, this is just some old vines. We have 25,000, so around 60,000 acres of old vines. This is huge, you guys, for any part of the world. And this is a nice map of Argentina. And this is this man that we call her Viejito de Rivadavia. So we were doing a photo shoot, and they were sending me photos from the photo shoot, and they sent me a picture of this man. And I say, you guys, wait, this man, is he like, why are we still making this guy work? And so, I told them, go talk to him, ask him, what's going on, like how old he is. So they said to him, like, why are you not retired? And he became terrified. He's like, you can't take any more photos of me if you're going to make me retire. And they're like, no, we just want to know what's going on. And he's like, oh no, yeah. He's like, I've been offered retirement now for I think he's in his 80s for years. He said, but I love working here. So I've always asked to stay on my job, which you're allowed to do that in Argentina. You can retire and stay on a job. And he said, and please, don't take my photo, but I don't want to retire. We were like, I told them, no, tell him it's fine. And then I talked to his boss, and they were like, yeah, this guy is he's solid. He's does such a great job. And, he never wants to retire. So of course we're not going to make him retire. And so so the reason I have this photo of him is because we are now doing this project where we're taking thousands of cuttings from old vines of, you saw this 25,000 hectares. So the institute in Argentina is doing this not preservation, it's like rescue of old vines that are at risk of being pulled out, 100-year-old vineyards. And they're planting some cuttings in like this small place in the university, but we're actually making this huge piece of land available for these cuttings to be preserved. And this is with virus. We do not have the money because it costs $4 per vine to test it. So we're making this huge piece of land available. And the reason I have this man in this photo is that I feel like each vine is like a person, and we can't let them die off. And so I feel like we have an obligation to preserve all this genetic diversity that, it's most likely that these pre-phylloxeric vines are only left in Argentina. And so if we allow these, 100-year-old vines to get replanted, this genetic diversity will disappear for the world. And so I think this is really important. Okay, so I'm done with the talk.
Right.
Oh, this is the social media. If you guys, I'm Laura Catena MD, and the winery is Catena Wines. Okay, let me stop share. Okay.
Right. Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate it. You've been getting so much love in the comments. I'm not sure if you've been able to check that out, but
I saw the little hearts. Thankful. I love that. I love the hearts.
Yes, and we do have a good bit of questions that were left unanswered. We can kind of extract those later and answer some of those, but
I would say let's go till 9:05.
Okay.
So that would give us about 9 minutes. I think that would or 9:04 for me in California. Yeah.
Awesome. So real quick on that terroir study, interesting question. Were you using indigenous or commercial yeast for that study?
So there was commercial yeast because we wanted to separate the native yeast. I think the study should be done again with the native yeast. Yes, but we did use commercial yeast for standardization. Yeah. Gotcha. Great question.
Yeah. Another one to do with the stuff in the cellar. So could you explain if you use chaptalization or reverse osmosis? The fact that you have access to grapes from warmer regions must reduce the use of newer technology.
That's such a great question. So we, in Argentina, even cool climate, like we have Cabernet Sauvignon planted in zone 1, like Burgundian climate. And if that was in Burgundy, it would not ripen and you'd have to chaptalize. But in Argentina, we have this long hang time, so we don't get early rains, with the fall. So basically, you have this cool climate place with a ton of sunlight, and the grapes still ripen because you have this long time, from veraison to harvest. And, sometimes we harvest when, the leaves are already turning a little bit brown and red, and we still are able to harvest. So we do not have a sugar problem. What we do have is that in these higher altitude areas, the sugars go up really slowly, but we retain acidity. And that's why we're harvesting something that is just like perfect, because it's got the perfect sugar, the perfect acidity, and it's all happening at the same time, and the tannin development. So it's not so cold that we have to chaptalize. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. And this kind of goes into another question. So are there any other levels of intervention in the cellar that you have to account for?
So, the winemaking in Argentina is very non-interventionist, because the fruit we get is already so good, because, we in each location, we're planting the right stuff and being able to harvest at the right time. We do mostly native. So we have the one winery, we make all our top wines. We never use any exogenous yeast. We just allow the native yeast to happen. And then we do have another winery where we make a little more volume wine, where we do inoculate. In terms of sulfur, for example, in the winery where we make all our top wines, our strategy is to always use the least amount of sulfur possible, like the least. If it's necessary, because we see that, like the pH is a little high, depending on the year, and we might need to use a little more, we use it. But we do no recipe winemaking. Like, there's a lot of people at our wineries. I go to wineries in other countries, and I say, where's all the people? And then they show me like this thing on the wall. It's like you press this button and like, you get the batonnage. Like, we have a person doing the batonnage. And actually, people are very happy to have these jobs, because today you do have enough technology that the jobs are not as backbreaking as they used to be. I think hand harvesting is still pretty hard, and pruning is the hardest. But in the winery, we have a machine that can lift a barrel, so but we're still doing a lot of the stuff manually, and it's very individualized. We do not have, like, we never do like, oh, you know, add this much sulfur to these 10 barrels. Like every barrel, like this one's going to get batonnage, this one might need a filtering, you know, this one, you know, it's going to get a different level of SO2 than another. So we do very individualized per parcel, per barrel winemaking.
Great. Yeah, that's always a good tidbit to know. So the other one has to do with the Massal selection. So
Yeah.
you explained it perfectly. What would you say are the key markers to identify Argentina Malbec in contrast to Malbec from Cahors?
Oh, that's such a big question. I love Cahors Malbec. I think it's so delicious. It's so different. You know, I think that it's Argentine is more fruity. Like you smell. I also feel more like it's more mineral, especially from the Uco Valley. You know, I feel like Cahors is warmer than the cool parts of the Uco Valley, so I feel it's a little riper. I also feel like the tannins are more tannic. You know, like Argentine Malbec is always smooth, even if it's super big. The tannins are going to taste smooth, whereas I feel like the Cahors Malbec tastes a little more tannicky. You know, it's like a little more grippy on the tongue. I don't know why that is, actually. In Cahors, they have less genetic diversity than we have in Argentina, because, you know, the area was basically almost lost with this big frost they had in the 1950s. I do know they have some Massal selections, but I don't know that much about them. So I think that they're very different, Cahors and Argentina, but I do love Cahors wines. Yes. I feel like they're also a little more rustic, a little less elegant, especially, you know, like the really, you know, the single parcel, like Adriana stuff that we have is more like, you know, in going towards the sort of Pinot Noir elegance style.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, this isn't a question, but I really want to read it to you to make sure you see it. Federica says, Laura, your presentation has been by far the best one we have seen at WSET. Congrats.
Oh my God.
So that's a good bit of love there.
I'm flattered.
This other one has to do with Massal as well. So does the Massal planting result in a gradual change to the character of your wines over time if the composition of the vineyard is evolving?
So, I mean, the composition of the vineyard evolves a little bit in terms of epigenetics, you know, and actually we have some really cool research that vines in Argentina have components that are related to protection against sunlight that is different from, you know, clones or cuttings that have been grown at sea level. So I think that, but once the vine is there, you know, the changes are related to weather or water or, you know, I think because you have such a different genetic material, you have this capacity to respond to climate that is more resilient than when you have a single clone, or just like 3 clones. So how much is the vineyard evolving because of the Massal selection? Well, a lot, because each individual, you know, is evolving differently. So, but you know, how like all I can do is like blah blah, like talk about what I think, because we've not done, like, I don't know how you would do that research because you have so many individuals. You'd have to have a Massal selection next to another Massal selection in a different climate, like the same. Actually, we could do that research because we have our same Massal selection in 2 different climates. Okay, that's a cool research.
That'd be an awesome addition to it. Okay, so then this other one, I know we're talking a little bit more about sustainability in a different section, but could you please explain to us if there are initiatives in Mendoza and Argentina to make wine production more sustainable? Maybe if you can just give us
I'll do the,
seconds.
So actually there's a sustainability code, which we brought the code to Argentina, and then it was adopted by Bodega Argentina. Now it's used by hundreds of wineries. We have a very fantastic code that lots of wineries work together at things like glass weight, like, you know, don't use pesticides. Let's help our people have better lives, like labor laws. It is so great. The sustainability code in Argentina, I really like it. And it's been criticized by somebody at one point that it was a little too easy to enter. But I think that's the way to do it, because what we want is to get a lot of people. Once you're in, you get into the whole sustainability concept, and then we can have you go higher in the requirements. And actually, it's so good that it's been adopted by the Norwegian and the Swedish monopolies, which are very strict. Now, sustainable wines from Argentina go in the green section because they are so impressed by the work we're doing. So we have a great sustainability code, and I do think we don't talk enough about it. Like, I feel like New Zealand is always talking about it, and I'm always envious. Like, how do they make it so that everybody knows about sustainability in New Zealand and not many people know about Argentina? So I'm a slacker. I've not been working hard enough on this. I'll finish with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much,
Okay.
Nora. I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone,
you
for joining us.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.